Hey, Steve.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you? Awesome. All right. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you just fine.
All right. I am here with my Broadcast Technology 2 students right behind me.
Ooh.
Oh,
Hi.
Everybody, this is Steve Hartman.
6. Oh, I see you over there.
And Martine is over here,
Oh,
who you met
17?
earlier.
Oh, okay.
How are you?
I met you earlier.
Yes.
Yeah, hi.
Okay. All right. So I think we've got all the technical issues taken care of. We're excited to have you, Steve, just to talk for a few minutes. As I mentioned to you when we first connected a month or so ago, that I've followed your work for a long time. I teach your style of storytelling, and these kids know that firsthand, and all my kids have. I encourage that kind of storytelling, and based off of that foundation, then they kind of go off and they are able to specialize sometimes in their own way, but we always go back to story, and there's really nobody that I know better that tells a story than you do. So I'm really excited for them to meet you here virtually, maybe ask you a couple of questions, because we were at a journalism convention about a month ago, and one of the instructors used one of your stories as an example. We had a couple of students who were in there, shed a few tears.
Really?
Yes.
What story was that?
So why don't you guys tell them which story you saw?
Well, there were a couple of them. One was the dog that was found on like the side of the road in the car accident.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then the other one was.
I vaguely remember that story. I've done so many of these now, I don't even remember all of them. But I vaguely remember that thing. Yeah. Wow, that's weird that somebody showed that one.
And then
What was the other one?
The other one was like the Santa. The dad was coming home from Afghanistan.
Oh, yeah.
And he was dressed as Santa.
The interesting thing about that story was that dad, this was in backwoods of South Carolina or something like that, he really didn't trust us because we were city-type guys. He wanted us to do a shot of moonshine with him, the cameraman and me. So we each had to do a shot of moonshine before we could do the interview. That's the only time that's ever happened. Generally frowned upon to drink on the job, but if it's key to getting the interview, then I guess it's okay.
That's so funny.
One of the stories I loved, and these guys have seen it now a number of times, but it's the Olivet Middle School with the boy Keith, who they arranged to score the touchdown.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that story, like how you found out about it and then how you approached putting that story together?
Well, I have a producer who works with me who sort of looks through local newspapers and goes online and just tries to find stories that sort of fit my niche. And this was a video that had generated some interest, and we went to do a story. And there's several stories like this where the disabled kid gets put in the game and whatever happens. And that's the story we set out to do. What was really amazing about that story was the interview with the kid who, it wasn't his idea, assuming everybody's seen this story, the kid who, it wasn't his idea to do this for this other student, and how it affected him, which was kind of, to me, the most important part of the story, and it's not what we went out there to tell. It's just something we kind of stumbled into, and I think it's really important whenever you go out and to report a story. Sometimes you have in your mind the story you're going to cover, and sometimes that's the story that you end up with, and sometimes it's something completely different, and it's really important to keep your eyes and your mind open to different things that might happen while you're shooting it. I once had to do a story about a baby whale that was born at SeaWorld or something like that when I was a local news reporter in California. I got there and you couldn't see the baby whale. It was behind a rock or something like that. So I had to do a whole story about how, nobody could see the baby whale, and it ended up being better than if we could see it. So sometimes, good things happen when bad things happen.
There's a couple things I want that we highlight with your storytelling. Let's start. The first one, the Everybody Has a Story that you used to do, and Les Rose, who I had a chance to meet with Les, where you guys would just randomly go, throw a dart at the map and go randomly and find people who would never expect to have their stories told. And can you just describe a little bit about where that idea came from and how you were able to extract something that not only was interesting but really powerful from people you typically wouldn't have heard from in the news?
Most of the time we were able to. I remember there's one woman in Normal, Illinois who was exceedingly normal and did not make for a very good story. But you're right, most of the time we did find things that surprised even us. The idea came from a local news reporter in Lewiston, Idaho, who for for years had been picking people out of the local phone book there in Idaho and putting their story on the front page of the newspaper. And I set out to do a story on him and this crazy idea he had, as if just picking people at random could make for interesting stories. I was really skeptical, and I was planning to do just a really funny story. So we threw a dart at a map, did the first one, and ended up in Glasscock County, Texas, which was the most godforsaken place in America. 110 degrees, I think it was. The hotel, I remember, was $25 a night and exorbitantly overpriced at that. But we found this just really neat story, and I thought it was a fluke. And CBS said, try that again. And we tried it again and got another story, and I still thought it was a fluke. And it took about a dozen of these things before I finally really started to see what was happening, that there really was, a great story and a whole list of great stories dangling from every payphone in America. And I think what we discovered was that what you find when you pick people who aren't the typical characters that we look for to put on TV, you find people with really relatable stories about faith and family and all the things that matter to most Americans. And so the stories we told were often about people's struggles, but struggles they've overcome and how they were able to overcome them. And we did about 123 of those stories, and it's still, one of the highlights, if not the highlight of my career.
It seems like you've maintained that same philosophy. Who had the question of finding stories? Was that you?
Yeah, what type of questions do you ask to get these great stories?
Well, when I did the On the Road series, the one thing I did ask often, and a lot of times people don't know what their own stories are. If I asked you, what do you think your story is, you might go, I don't know. It would take sometimes your friends or your family or me to ask you just a series of questions to figure out what story I think is in you that others might find interesting or ideally be able to learn something from. But one of the questions that often got me where I needed to be was, what's the biggest obstacle in your life that you've overcome? And we've all had those things. Things were tough times in our lives that we got past. And the fact that we got past them means we learned something from them. So that was probably the one question that got me the story more than anything else. But there were other times when, we struggled and never really found a great story, or it was obvious when we walked in, like the guy who kept a mummy in his garage for 90 years.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's a story.
What are some other questions that you ask, or is there a trick or a technique to get people to talk if they are apprehensive, or just maybe some kind of interviewing skill or technique that always seems to at least work more often than not?
That is one of the hardest things with television, because a newspaper reporter can just go in with a pad, a paper, and a pencil and just start asking questions. When you have a TV camera, it's a little more intimidating, and people tend to be, kind of frightened of the whole thing. So I try to diminish the whole, we're doing an interview now, okay, start, we're rolling, okay, go. A lot of times people aren't even aware when the interview starts and when it stops, and I try to keep it conversational. I have some ideas in my head of points I want to touch on, but I do not have a list of questions that, and I look down at my list and say, where were you on the night of December 23rd? It's not like that. It's just having a conversation. As to why people open up and tell me the things they tell me, I've often wondered that myself. And I one time asked a guy, that I was interviewing, why this was happening to me. And he said, just look at you, the way you're sitting on my couch. And I had my shoes off and my feet were tucked in underneath his cushions as if I was the next door neighbor. And he says that's a big part of it, just that you're just a regular guy that I'm talking to, and it doesn't feel like Walter Cronkite coming in and doing a big interview. The fact that I'm so unprofessional probably helps me.
One of the other things I really admire about your work, and we talk about and try and emulate, is the writing. I mean, it comes across as, I try to describe as like, the parent reading the book, the narrator telling the story, to the young child. I mean, you really are able to weave in the words. For example, going back to the Olivet Middle School, I love when you're introducing us to Keith, how the team, embraces him, and you're showing him while he's hugging them, the play on the words of embrace. So can you talk just a little bit about how you're able to structure your writing and the ideas you get to write to weave these stories?
Let me go back a little bit. When I first went into TV, as opposed to newspapers, I went into TV because I thought I could meet more girls. That was my motivation. I really didn't want to do any of the craft, the writing. I just wanted to be a celebrity. This is going back to when you're in high school or college. You know, I thought that would be the neatest part of the whole thing. I couldn't wait till I made it to the network and I could have somebody else write for me. But something changed over the years where I just started, you know, really enjoying the craft. And it's a craft, not an art, which is good because an art is hard to learn. A craft just takes practice. And I'm still not a very good writer. What I do is I just rewrite a lot. I mean, the first time you write something, you know, it's never that good, but you rewrite it and look at it again, walk away and come back. You know, I spend a lot of time. And Scott Pelley, who's probably our best writer at CBS, you know, he's the same way. He just feels like it's just a lot of work. Good writing is just a lot of work. It's not anything, any gift that anybody's given, which should be, for those of you who want to go into storytelling, you know, you don't feel like, oh, maybe I'm not such a great writer. Don't worry about it. You know, all you have to do is work at it. If you got a good work ethic, you'll get good at it. So in terms of how I do what I do, I don't know that either. I just, you know, I sit down and I spend a lot of time and I just write something, then that doesn't sound quite right, and I'll rewrite it, and some idea will strike me. It's just work.
You use the short sound bites. So do you take some of the things then that your characters tell you, your interviews tell you, to kind of craft in a little bit more of a creative way then? Would that be one way?
Not, you know, I think I've heard it, like, use your good sound bites and then take the other things, the sound bites you're not using, and rewrite them and putting together your script. I've never really done it that way. I just look for sound bites that I find compelling, and things that I can't say. If somebody says, when I lost my dog, it was like a pain so deep, you know, it went down to my toes. That's a good sound bite. If he says, my dog died on June 12th, 1982, that's something I can say.
Right.
So I'm just looking for good sound bites that convey some emotion, that don't lose me. I don't get bored with them. They can be really long if I'm hooked on every bit of it. I don't want anybody to change the channel when I'm on TV. That's my big motivator. I don't want somebody flipping over to NBC or ABC. Not on my watch. So,
awesome. Do you guys have any questions?
Do you edit your own videos?
That's a good question. Yes, that's I sit here, right? I'm in my home, my office here. I'm actually the only correspondent, the network correspondent, who actually edits my own stories, and I do that because, and that's actually probably the biggest secret to my success, because normally, you know, at least at network television, somebody writes a story, they kind of look at the sound bites, they write a story, and then they turn it over to an editor who puts it together. But it never quite works out the way you first planned. You know, the soundbite, well, it's not quite as good as I thought, or that track, I don't have any pictures to cover that track with, so you want to make all these changes. So I kind of lay the story out first with the sound bites I like, and then I might put in some pictures, you know, edit some video, like it would be nice if this scene unfolded like this, and then I might write something. So I'm writing and editing and producing all at the same time, and I do that right here.
Go ahead, Caitlin.
What advice would you give to us who want to be involved in television?
Who want to what?
Who want to be involved in television.
Well, the first thing, you know, you want to go to as good a school as you can, and get a good education. But then beyond that, probably the most important thing is a good internship. CBS has great internships. There's good internships at local stations as well. But that is really the key. And that was the key for me. I got a great job out of college where they actually put me on television my junior year in college as a summer vacation relief reporter. If I hadn't had that opportunity, I don't know what I'd be doing right now. But that internship is just everything. Once you're in college and you've got a good school, beginning your sophomore year, junior year, you just really should start thinking about internships and where am I going to get some real practical experience. In our business, that matters almost more than anything.
Anybody else? Yeah, Adama.
When did you realize, since you said you had like a change over the years, from like just wanting to be famous to actually liking what you did? When did you like see that change? Or, like, what is something that
Repeat that for me, if you would.
So when you said that you had a change of interest from just wanting to be famous to actually liking the craft.
Yeah.
When did you see that happening?
When did I see that happen? Very gradually, very gradually. But I remember the distinct feeling of like not liking writing because it's so much work and I didn't feel like I was good at it. To think I cannot wait till somebody else does this and I can just collect a big paycheck. To then flash forward 20 years and like I don't want anybody else writing for me. That's the last thing on earth I would want right now. And I don't want to be famous. I don't even put myself in the story very much. I just like telling stories. So it was a maturing. I mean, obviously, I was very immature when I'm thinking I'm going into this business, for fame and celebrity. I just matured. And when it happened, it wasn't a certain date, but it happened at some point in the last 30 years. I'll narrow it down to that.
Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What advice would you give the students in regards to like putting their projects out there, or just showing all of their work that they've done in high school or maybe just college? How would you suggest that they promote themselves?
Promote themselves for what purpose?
To show their video work and to get jobs, sort of like your online resume in college also.
Right.
What type of advice would you give?
I imagine most colleges really don't care or aren't interested in looking at video that you've done. Mm-hmm. They probably they don't have enough time to be watching videotapes. So at this level, I don't think it matters too much. What's nice to get your work seen at this level is to get feedback and start learning and see what am I doing wrong, what am I doing right, because you can learn to put together a story in a day, but it takes decades to really refine it, and might as well get started on that sooner than later. And you should be, and this is when you should become really comfortable with criticism. When you're in high school, don't I always say hate your work, hate your own work, or somebody else will. Because if you can't find the fault with it, you're not going to be able to improve it. So I'm always looking for people to really beat me up and find, like, what's wrong with this? Oh, it's a great story. No, what's wrong with it? What could make this better? Because there are always a million things that could be better.
I think
they're laughing because they're like, Mr. Goble, you're so mean. You only tell us what's wrong. Like, that's not true.
That's the only thing that's going to help you.
Right.
There's no point in him telling you, what. I mean, he's not there to boost your ego. And hopefully you really don't need much of that. The only way that he can really help you is by telling you what's wrong and what can be better. Sorry, we did not even rehearse this.
We did not.
No. That was good.
We're coming up on time, and I want to respect that. I have one final question. Just, tell us like the best part of being a journalist, the best part of being a storyteller. What has that meant to you? What is that for you?
Right now, for me, the best part is just changing people's lives, even if it's just for 30 seconds after they watch the story. They're moved. Often they're moved to change their own lives in some way. I get lots of email. I saw this story and I decided I was going to do this with my life. Not many reporters are blessed with that kind of impact. So at this point in my career, that's what I get out of it. Now, if I was an investigative reporter, you can change the world in a whole different way. But just changing people and changing laws and making the world a better place is ultimately what you should be thinking if you go into journalism, because that's what it's all about.
Well, you've definitely, not to be cheesy, but you've changed my life and how I teach. In the fact now that we've been able to connect, I really appreciate this because I think your words, I hope, will really resonate with my students. I'm excited then to share it with my other classes as well. I don't know. Do you have any parting thoughts? Is there anything else you'd like to say before we let you go?
No, but I think what you did when you reached out to me is a good example of just the importance of just asking. I had one last story. I had an intern who came and worked with me his junior year in college, and we were talking about the Everybody Has a Story project and how I had this dream of taking it globally. I just had this crazy idea that maybe NASA would fly up a globe into space and spin the globe high over, the world where there are no political boundaries, where we're all the same, and they would point to a place on the globe, and we'd zoom down, and I would go to that place and pick somebody out of the phone book in whatever country that was. It was just a crazy idea I had. And this junior in college takes that and over his senior year contacts NASA, gets them to agree to fly a globe into space for CBS News. They've never done anything like that before. But he made that happen. He's a producer at 60 Minutes now.
Wow.
But the point is that he asked, he tried. And 99 times out of 100, he's not going to get to first base. But it just shows what you did, and what he did just shows that you've got to just at least try. Because you never know. Try 100 times, and one time it's going to work.
We love it. We're going to keep watching your stories. Thanks for your time. And we'll just keep being excited to see what you come up with next, man.
Great. Thank you so much, you guys.
Take care, Steve.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.